welcome to Storyliners, and tonight we start the programme on a historical note. Something which we've been hearing a lot about lately is Gibraltar's bid for World Heritage status within UNESCO. Here at the Gibraltar Museum, a database and inventory is currently being prepared. To tell us more about it, the director, Dr. Clive Phillison.
Well, I mean, at the moment, the way it's been structured is there's a commission that's chaired by the Minister for Heritage, Kisa Sapardi, that meets on a regular basis. And then there's a working group, which I chair, which works directly to the Commission. And our task is really to provide that backup support for the steering process to get the bid together in the next few years. The first aspect of that bid, before we begin to do things like preparing management plans, which are very important and required by UNESCO, is that we should know what we've got. So this working group, which includes largely people who work here in the museum, but also the government's conservation officer and representatives also from other bodies, this working group has set itself the task in the first year of creating an inventory of all the important sites in Gibraltar. Believe it or not, it didn't exist. So that we can begin through, especially we're using modern sort of information technology, we can begin to logically plan the definition of areas that are most important conservation areas. We can begin to prioritize. Let me give you an example. If we have 3 buildings that are of very high heritage value, then perhaps one is in better condition than the other, or one is more threatened than the other, so that may help to prioritize those that are of equal value, so that we can begin to make rational decisions in terms of we can have a coherent management plan, so that in terms of our approach to the heritage, it's not a question of let's react because somebody's going to pull a wall down, but rather that we begin to say, well, this is really the number one sort of high priority areas, these are the sort of the next level down, and so on, and we can form the basis of a plan. That requires a lot of very hard work. It requires a lot of people going out into the field, collecting data, inputting it and processing it, and I think that's part of what you're going to be seeing in a minute.
Well, Dr. Farr, you're actually dividing the work with Geraldine Phillison. So what exactly is it that you're doing?
What aren't I doing? Right. Well, initially, as you know, we're looking at creating a database which will actually involve ultimately any aspect of heritage in Gibraltar. To start off with, because there is just so much, although it's never actually been catalogued, we decided to concentrate on fortifications. So the first thing that we started to do was set up an actual comprehensive database, which would involve information from a wide range of sources on all different aspects of different elements around Gibraltar. And these actually include and bring in influences from outside, not just within purely, shall we say, the historical angle. Apart from actually looking at the actual history of a site, for example, and its importance, etc. For example, we'll also look at what value or potential it has within, say, education, to do with tourism, whether it's actually easily accessible or not with people with disabilities. So it actually brings in a whole range of information. So hopefully later on, anyone accessing this database will be able to search it in a whole range of different ways depending on what their requirements are.
That's what you're concentrating on. I believe Geraldine is doing the cultural.
Yeah.
So you're doing buildings and historical. Do you find that it's something that's never ending, because one thing will lead to another and another and another, so it just spreads out?
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's not just the actual idea of buildings and monuments to an extent, but it's, I suppose, there's also the element almost of scale. I mean, at the smallest level, a ring in the side of a road used to hold up a cannon is important, and, for example, a whole range of defensive works, like, for example, the Roger defences, form an integrated unit, a whole, and within that you've got smaller subsections, each of which has their own particular history. So it's not just at one level, but you've got also different levels within it. So yes, I mean, it's something which is very, very much on the long term. In fact, it's so much long term, really. We've had to secondarily and in parallel too develop this aspect of an inventory, and the idea behind that is to quickly assess and be able to rank and prioritize areas and sites and locations. So what we've started off doing is giving each site a value in terms of its history, from very common to unique in the world. And then, for example, we also give it a value in regards to how threatened it is. For example, something can be in good condition, but they're about to build something next to it, on top of it, or the actual condition it's actually in. And using these three variables, we actually start to get an idea which allows us to prioritize and then hopefully be a bit more proactive with regards to not just sites but entire areas. We should say, well, this has got a particularly high ranking for whatever reason, so this area becomes a high value conservation area, and then you can identify buffer areas around it where sort of like developments or whatever can be restricted. And the whole thing then goes into long-term management plan for the whole.
How difficult has it been to actually get information on all the sites and all the things you're talking about? Has it been a case of things popping up from all over the place?
Very much so. I mean, in some cases you have a glut of information. For example, in terms of military history, there's been lots of people writing. And more often than not, the difficulty there is teasing out the reality from what the flavor each writer has wanted to give what they're writing about. In other areas, there's hardly any, and we've identified a real need. I mean, Geraldine will talk to you later on about the cultural aspects. I mean, which is so short term and so easily lost, and it's just well, this is the first attempt to try and get some of it and actually sort of be able to store it and save it for future generations, really.
Well, Geraldine, you've been concentrating on the cultural side, equally as important as the historical and perhaps the buildings.
Absolutely. The problem with the cultural database, if you like, is that we are dealing with things that are difficult to hold. They're not physical. You can't measure them in the way that you may be able to measure a building, the height of a building, or look at the condition it's in. So we have to rely on people's memories, on interviews that we make with people, on people bringing to us the way that they remember having played a particular game, because what we're looking at is just that, games, cuisine, things that are slowly being lost because nobody's bothered to write down anything about them. For example, a good example comes to mind. Everyone remembers La Plosion, the Bedenham explosion. And many families will refer to certain events having happened before La Plosion or después de La Plosion. Now, these individual experiences by those families are very particular, but they won't work themselves into a history book because they may not have the importance from a larger scale on a historical side. But they can be incorporated into a cultural database, which is recording our oral history and our traditions, songs that are being lost, this sort of thing. So this is what this cultural database, if you like, is dealing with.
How do you actually prioritize, Geraldine? Because are you looking for events or perhaps things that have molded the Gibraltarians into the people, into the community that they are today?
Prioritize is it's a problem that we have. Initially, when we started, we talked about a database, a cultural database. It soon became very obvious that we were really looking at a number of subjects that we wanted to concentrate on, and then we tried to identify these subjects. We drew up a list of databases. Obviously, they will all be interconnected, so they can all sort of talk to each other once the information is in them. But we decided that we would look at specific themes, if you like. So, for example, I mentioned cuisine. Everyone sort of talks about la calentita being our national dish. Well, why is it?
Good, we've got a plate of calentita just beside us, which is waiting for us after the interview.
Well, it's a very good example because everyone says, oh, Gibraltar's national dish is la calentita. Okay, do we know the name, where it originated from, what country is it from? We've assumed that it's Italian. Our research has shown subsequently that it's from the northern part of Italy, and a related dish, which is called the banissa, which is made from similar ingredients, just prepared in a different way, is actually from what is now southern France, although when the dish originated, it was part of Italy. Now, all this is the sort of information that we want to try and pull together and try and identify. And then it opens the floodgates, if you like, because one household will prepare calentita or rosto in one way, and another household will prepare it in a different way. There, what you have is the contribution of different traditions, because our families have different ethnic backgrounds. So if one particular lady was cooking rosto in a particular way, but in her family they didn't like beef, for example, where she may have substituted it for pork. So it becomes very difficult to try and find what the original ingredient was and what the traditional ingredient has become. And the perfect example of that, of course, has to be el queso bola. It's a Dutch Edam. And that's what's made us wonder about, why Dutch Edam in Gibraltar, in the Mediterranean, when the obvious thing would have been Parmesano or Pecorino or some Spanish cheese, which would have been more readily available. We now know that it's because of our links with the Dutch as a result of the 1704 capture of Gibraltar. These are all things which are ephemeral. They have people generally know about them, but they don't work their way into history books.
You mentioned the Bedenham explosion and obviously events that have shaped Gibraltar. What would you highlight within those? The evacuation, a perfect example.
Well, the evacuation obviously has to be one of the most important events. The Bedenham explosion, the Utopia, the sinking of the Utopia, it's even worked itself into our language. You say, oh, so del año de la Utopia. It's worked itself into our tradition, into our folklore, and there are many other examples, and perhaps from different family backgrounds you have events which become important for a particular family, but not for another family, because maybe that family has originated in Catalan Bay. So they will have their own folklore, which will be important because of their circumstances. And bringing Catalan Bay, talking about Catalan Bay, brings us to artisanship. This is something else that we want to record. There are still people in Catalan Bay who have the old traditional methods of making boats. And this has to be recorded because it's being lost. It's passed from grandfather to son to grandson. And if we don't record it, soon there will be fewer and fewer people, and eventually it might even die out. So we really have to start thinking about recording the nets, the way they make the nets. And then from that you can then start studying, well, okay, is it based on a Spanish tradition? Is it based on a Italian tradition? And this becomes extremely interesting. And in fact, there are some centers of oral histories, for example, in the British Library or the Library of Congress in the United States, which are doing precisely this, except that they're dedicating themselves to just one project. And we are currently trying to do as much as possible on as large a spectrum as possible without actually stopping people from talking to us about something which might be important to them, which may not have occurred to us.
Well, the inventory will form the basis of our next stage, which is in discussion with the Commission, is the preparation of the management plans. And this is something that I'm very conscious, it's something that will have to involve the whole community. I think people still think of heritage in certain circles, as something that is the domain of certain people. We must realize that what this does is it creates a thrust for heritage for Gibraltar, which will include sustainability, economic growth. It can be a very important sector that will help the whole of the community. So we must, in doing all this, make sure that we all, and in drafting these plans, one of our ideas is to create a series of seminars to make the public generally aware of what we're doing and the value of this. That it's not just the interest of a few buffs who want to protect one or two walls, that this is going to be very important from an economic perspective for Gibraltar generally and for all of us, so that we all win from this. I think that's an important message. The database is something that's going to be ongoing. It'll carry on forever and ever because, we will always be updating. But the elements, to answer your original question, the elements of that inventory will form the basis of the plan, and what really will get submitted to UNESCO will be a management plan that isn't just restricted to 1, 2, 3 years, but will be an ongoing plan, a rolling plan, which includes supporting legislation, will include supporting town plans, and will include things like the inventory and how we have adjudicated, if you like, the different priorities.
Clive, as we know, Gibraltar is up against stiff competition. How confident are you that we will achieve World Heritage status?
the specialists who have been to Gibraltar, who know more about the world picture than I do, all invariably say that if it's based on potential, Gibraltar must rank among one of the highest. So therefore, if it's judged purely on merit, which we hope it will be, I am very confident that we will get there.
If you feel you can contribute with any information, contact Geraldine Phillison at the John Mackintosh Hall on telephone number 73457. Workers' Day has proved to be a welcome holiday for all of us. It's certainly not celebrated on the Rock as it used to be, though, perhaps because people are more comfortable and are therefore less militant. But certainly times are changing. The TGWU's District Officer, Luis Montel, explains what exactly we're celebrating.
The history, the labour history of May the 1st is centred or rooted in the United States in the struggle of many American workers to fight for the 8-hour day. These workers started to organize themselves in federations and organizations, and a particular incident occurred in May 1890, whereby in Chicago, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was a Haymarket Center in Chicago, there was an unprovoked attack by the police on demonstrators. As a result of that, a bomb went off, and as a result of bullets as well from the police and so forth, about 8 demonstrators died. Subsequent to that, of course, the authorities in the United States, which were very reactionary, decided to introduce what the Red Scare campaign, and 4 radicals were simply selected and executed to set an example. Of course, that was a great struggle in the United States, and about 200,000 workers were awarded the 8-hour day, so it was a great achievement as a result of that. So that symbolism of struggle was then picked up by the Socialist International in Paris around the 1890-something, and decided to campaign throughout the world now, not just in the United States, for the 8-hour work. And May the 1st was then the symbolic day on which workers could unite, demonstrate to promote their manifesto. But of course it was in the struggle, the American struggle, taken over by the European movement, socialist movement, and making May the 1st as a symbolic day for workers' emancipation.
So is it an international holiday now?
Of course, the economic system has changed dramatically, and of course the capitalist system tends to determine even change history. For example, even in the United States, when May the 1st was originally reckoned to be the day of the worker, they turned it over upside down, and they changed it to Labor Day, taking away the historical significance of the May the 1st struggle for emancipation on the shorter working week.
Louis, if you think back to how May the 1st was celebrated here in Gibraltar, what do you remember?
Oh, we have a good record here in Gibraltar of celebrating May Day. I remember originally when I was a young man, back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, I used to be part of the Young Christian Workers. We used to take films in the many areas of Gibraltar, highlighting the housing problems that we had in Gibraltar. We photographed the hostels of the immigrant workers. We promoted issues that were to the hearts of young people. And of course, we campaigned on many other issues in Gibraltar of great importance to the working class. These were beautifully organized and promoted in the John Mackintosh Hall, actually. And they used to be very, very popular. And of course, then we progressed into the trade union movement. You know, the trade union movement then took root, and the great achievements that have been achieved in Gibraltar. The standard of living in Gibraltar was dramatically improved and increased from the demonstrations and the social awareness that took part from early days. And of course, now we have reached a point when the Transport and Rail Workers Union, being the heart of any progressive development in Gibraltar, is now can look back and say, you know, we have achieved so far so much, you know, and look from the position that we are now, where are we going to? As I said, you know, the economic system in Gibraltar has changed as well, so that creates a different perspective to the struggle. You know? Now we are more materialistic. We've got a stronger economy, so things have got to be done different to what they were done.
So have negotiations taken over from demonstrations?
Unfortunately, yes. The major part of things are now done through the machineries of society, which are here now than they were not there before. Certainly, it is easier now to promote issues than they were then, and get results today. But of course, we have lost something that we should never have lost. And there is one criticism of the Transport and Rail Workers Union of the past years, is that we have not kept up with the times, with our historical past. And to keep up with the times of the past, we've got to keep May the 1st as a symbolic day. And I'm already now, that there is now more awareness in the union, I'm getting a lot of pressures now from people saying, look, we should do something for May the 1st. Unfortunately, this year has not been possible. The pressures in this union are tremendous, you know, and these things need time to organize. We've got to bring people of caliber to give speeches and so forth. So we are hoping that next year we will start from small beginnings again, you know, start to revive the historical, symbolic principle of May the 1st.
Well, we can't seem to get away from the military as the Royal Gibraltar Regiment celebrates its 61st birthday. To tell us more about that, here's the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Brancato.
Well, it's another important step in our development. I think we've come a long way since the days of the Gibraltar Defence Force through the regiment and now the Royal Gibraltar Regiment. I think, you know, we've progressed a hell of a lot, you know, professionally as a unit. A consequence of that is going outside on operational tours and doing things like exercise in Cyprus.
During the past couple of years, the regiment has been honoured on several occasions. It carried out the Royal Gun Salute at the Tower of London 2 years ago on the occasion of the Queen's birthday. It was to return to the Tower to perform the beating of retreat a year later, when its corps of drums also participated in the last Royal Tournament at Earl's Court. During these 2 years, the Gibraltar Regiment was also presented with new colours. But let me take you back in time to 1971. The Gibraltar Regiment was presented with colours by the Governor Admiral of the Fleets of Aral Beg at Alameda Grand Parade, a ceremony watched by thousands. That same day, it was also awarded the Freedom of the City.
O Lord, these colours which we bless in thy name, let those who are to bear them and follow them, keeping true faith unto thee, may be inspired to do their duty and abide in thy peace and obedience to thy will.
on Thursday, 22nd day of July 1971, it was resolved unanimously that the honorary freedom of the city should be conferred upon the Gibraltar Regiment, which symbolizes the will of the people of Gibraltar, always to contribute to the defense of their city and of their British heritage. Now, therefore, by way of civic honor, the freedom of the city, and thereby the right, privilege, and honor of marching through the streets of the city on ceremonial occasions, with swords drawn, bayonets fixed, colors flying, and bands playing, is hereby conferred upon the Gibraltar Regiment. In witness hereof, the seal of the city of Gibraltar was hereunto affixed this 25th day of September 1971. Alfred J. Vasquez, Mayor.
A year before that, the Action Group for Conscription handed the governor a letter enclosing a petition signed by over 6,000 people of voting age. It asked that compulsory military service be abolished in Gibraltar, and youngsters demonstrated. In 1971, conscription was abolished and replaced by a volunteer force called the New Look Gibraltar Regiment. 28 years later, on its 60th birthday, the regiment was conferred the prefix Royal.
3 cheers for Her Majesty the Queen! Hep, hep, hep! Royal! Hep, hep, hep! Royal! Hep, hep, hep! Royal!
Obviously, that was a great occasion for us. We've tried to build on that event, and we've actually been quite active on the public relations front, on the ceremonial side, and it's great to be back in Casement Square for the ceremony at Keys after a 2-year break.
The reenactment of the procedure, which took place every evening during the Great Siege and for the following 140 years, the ceremony of the Keys, began with the arrival of the band and drums and the outpost platoon provided by the Royal Gibraltar Regiment. Each evening during the Great Siege, before the fortress was locked and secured, a platoon was posted outside the walls on the north front of the rock to act as sentries, hence their title, the Outpost Platoon. They would pay their respects to the governor and then march to the Landport Gate. As it was the only land entrance to the fortress, its security was of paramount importance. It was the port sergeant's responsibility to lock the Landport Gate and all the gates of the fortress. In the morning, the port sergeant reopened all the gates and then handed back the keys to the governor for safekeeping. After peace was restored in 1783, the port sergeant and his escort, accompanied by the fifes and drums, would warn aliens to leave the rock. It was the Governor's, David Dewey's, first ceremony of the Keys, and following his inspection of the parade, the band performed a troop halting in front of the saluting dais till sunset, when the outpost platoon presented arms and the sunset gun was fired from Princess Caroline's battery, at the same time as the flags on the parade ground and the Tower of Homage were lowered.
Platoon! General! Salute! Freezing! Out!
Governor before marching through the Landport Gate to commence its duty on the Rock's North Front. This was followed by the march on parade of the escort to the quays. The port sergeant receives the keys from the governor and asks his permission to secure the fortress. Together with his escort, he will then lock one of the outer gates of Grand Casement's gates, challenged by the gate sentry. Having secured the gate, he will march back onto Casement Square and, following a final present arms to the quays, will report to His Excellency, saying that the fortress is secure and all's well.
Advance, Queen Elizabeth's case! Oh, well!
Well, I think it's gone very well. I think the setting is fantastic now. It's obviously a lot bigger, got more space. There's more public now to be able to go and watch it. And I particularly like the way the port sergeant now goes with his escort to Grand Casement Square to symbolise the locking of the gate.
So how do you see the future of the regiment?
I think it's going to be an excellent future. The quality of officers and men which we've got is outstanding, and therefore that is the most important factor. We've got a good role here in Gibraltar, and we increasingly, as I said before, we're going outside on different tours, Kosovo and Bosnia and places like that, and that can only be for the better.
Talking of the role of the Royal Gibraltar Regiment, how do you think the public perceives it?
Well, I think the public has seen the changes over the years. I think they realise that the regiment has an important role to play in the immediate security of Gibraltar and key national and NATO assets. And part of that is, and part of getting expertise actually, is going away from Gibraltar to broaden horizons, get more operational experience, and therefore when we come back, we'll be able to do our jobs a lot easier.
Well, that's it from Storyliners for this week. Next week we're back in our regular slot, and that's of course Tuesdays at 9. So please join me then.